I'm Rachel McMillan, 33, ER nurse, single mom, and, apparently, the invisible daughter in my own family. You wouldn't know it from my tone, but I used to be the golden girl. Honor roll, soccer scholarship, married by 24, baby at 27. On paper, I looked like I had it all together. Until my husband decided he wanted space and left me and our daughter behind. That's when the paper ripped in. My parents started acting like I wasn't one of them anymore. My daughter, Harper, she's 6. Big brown eyes, tiny gap between her front teeth, and a laugh that makes people smile even when they don't want to. She's my entire world. I work nights so I can be home in the morning when she wakes up. I pack her lunch with love notes, even if she can't read all the words yet. I haven't bought myself new shoes in 2 years, but Harper's closet is full of sparkly sneakers and unicorn hoodies. That's motherhood. That's love. And then there's my sister, Jessica. Jessica's 2 years younger than me and has been the favorite since birth. She's got the shiny life husband, nice house, Pinterest-perfect family with 2 blonde-haired kids who say please and thank you like it's a script. My parents Mark and Susan eat it up. My mom shares Jessica's Instagram stories like gospel. She babysits her kids 3 times a week, bakes with them, brags about them to the cashier at Target. And when it comes to Harper? Well, Rachel, Mom says in that tight, rehearsed tone, we just don't have the energy like we used to. Right. Funny how they find the energy when Jessica asks for a weekend away or a date night with her husband. But when I asked them to watch Harper so I could cover 2 extra shifts just to, Mom paused like I was requesting a kidney. Still, they agreed. Just Friday night to Sunday morning, I said. I'll pick her up first thing. Mom exhaled. Okay. But don't be late, Rachel, you know we have plans. They didn't mention what those plans were. I kissed Harper's forehead, told her Grandma and Grandpa were so excited to see her. I handed Mom her overnight bag snacks, pajamas, her favorite bedtime book and left, telling myself, you can trust them. They're your parents. Big mistake. I was standing over a sink full of Harper's laundry Sunday night when I got the call. Miss McMillan, this is Danielle from Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you about your daughter. The room tilted. I braced myself against the counter. She's with my parents, I said slowly. They were watching her for the weekend. I'm afraid not, the voice said. Your parents left the state Saturday morning. They boarded a flight to Hawaii. Your daughter was left with a neighbor who wasn't legally authorized to care for her. What? That can't be. My words tangled. They would have told me, they wouldn't just leave her. But they did. They didn't just leave her, they abandoned her. Harper was in state custody because my parents had decided to fly to Hawaii with Jessica and her kids. A family vacation. One they never told me about. One Harper and I were never even considered for. And that's when everything unraveled. Let me go back for a second because to understand the explosion, you need to see the cracks. My parents weren't always cold. Growing up, my dad used to take me to Saturday softball practice. And Mom would leave notes in my lunchbox like, I'm proud of you, and you're my sunshine. But things changed when Jessica got married to a man with a steady 6-figure income and popped out twins. Suddenly, their time was limited. Their patience, even more so. Jessica became the daughter who did it right. The one who stayed married. The one who lived 10 minutes away in a cul-de-sac full of swing sets and holiday wreaths. And it divorced. Renting a 2-bedroom apartment, working odd shifts became the difficult one. It didn't matter that I was raising Harper with more love and intention than some people ever receive. To them, I was the reminder of what could go wrong. Jessica? She was the proof that their parenting worked. Still, I never thought they'd go this far. Leaving a 6-year-old with a neighbor, no emergency contact, no plan, and flying to paradise with their other grandkids? That's not a misstep. That's a message. Loud and clear. You're not part of this family anymore. I'm not telling this story for sympathy. I'm telling it because if you've ever looked at your own family and felt like you were standing outside a window, watching them laugh at a table you weren't invited to, you're not alone. If you've ever felt like your child was being punished because you didn't live the picture-perfect life, they're not the only one. And if you've ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace, I get it. But I'm done being quiet. This is the story of how I fought for my daughter, for justice, for the truth, and how I stopped begging people to love us the way we deserve. I didn't even get to Harper before they did. The second I hung up with Child Protective Services, I grabbed my keys and bolted out the door, forgetting I hadn't slept in 20 hours. Forgetting I still had my scrub top on and unmatched socks. Forgetting everything except that my baby was scared, alone, probably confused out of her mind, and no one she trusted was there to hold her hand. It felt like my lungs had been scooped out of my chest and replaced with rocks. Every breath I took on the way to that office was shallow and panicked, like my body knew something was broken but didn't yet understand how deep the damage ran. When I got there, I expected screaming, tears, panic. But Harper was just sitting in a small beige room with a woman in a cardigan and a paper cup of juice, her little legs swinging off the chair, her bunny clutched tight to her chest. The second she saw me, she ran. "Mommy." I dropped to my knees and caught her, the sound she made against my shoulder almost animal, that high-pitched whimper that only happens when a child has held their fear in too long. I held her so tightly I think we both forgot we were in a government building surrounded by strangers and rules. In that moment, it was just me and her, and the unspoken promise I had made the day she was born. You'll never have to go through life alone. I've got you. The woman in the cardigan, Danielle, I think, stood awkwardly beside us with a clipboard in her hand. "Miss McMillan, I'm going to need you to answer some questions about the arrangement with your parents. Do you have any paperwork giving them temporary custody?" "Paperwork?" I blinked. "No," I said, swallowing the nausea rising in my throat. "They're her grandparents. I didn't think I needed paperwork." "Oblé." Danielle gave a practiced nod, the kind people give when they don't agree but have been trained not to argue. "We understand, but the neighbor who contacted us said she was unsure what to do. Your parents dropped Harper off with her Saturday morning, said it was just for a few hours. They didn't leave any emergency contact, no written instructions. And then, they left for Hawaii." I squeezed Harper tighter. No call, no note, no text message, not even a voicemail. They just vanished. And that neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, I remembered she wasn't even a friend, just someone who happened to live next door to my parents. We'd met once at a barbecue. She'd complimented Harper's curls and handed me a paper plate of coleslaw. And now, she'd been the one holding my daughter's hand through a trauma I didn't even see coming. I should have been grateful, and I was. But mostly, I was humiliated and furious. I signed whatever I needed to sign to take Harper home, her small hand wrapped in mine like she didn't plan on letting go again. And I didn't blame her. The drive back was quiet. Harper was tired, but she didn't sleep. She just stared out the window, her bunny tucked under her chin. I didn't speak either. My thoughts were too loud. Too sharp. I kept replaying everything in my head. Friday night, that casual, "don't be late" from my mom. The way they waved at us from the porch like nothing was wrong. Was this always the plan? Had they booked the flight while I was still folding Harper's pajamas into her backpack? They didn't even try to explain. Didn't even warn me. When we got home, I gave Harper a bubble bath, extra bubbles, because it was the only thing I could control in that moment. I scrubbed her scalp gently, watching her eyes start to droop as the warmth worked its way into her tiny frame, and I thought, you're not going to remember this exactly. But you'll remember the feeling. That no one came for you. That you weren't chosen. And I refused to let that memory take root. Once she was in bed, I sat on the edge of the couch and called my mother. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Then I tried my dad. Then Jessica. No answer. Not one. By the time midnight came, I was staring at Instagram like it was a crime scene. Jessica had just posted a photo of her kids laughing in the sand, mom in a beach chair with a giant sun hat, dad holding a coconut drink. The caption read, "Family trip of a lifetime with number bless number Ohana." No mention of me. No mention of Harper, not even a hint that anything had gone wrong. And I realized, sitting there in the dark while my daughter clung to a stuffed animal like a life raft, that they weren't just avoiding me. They had erased us. Like we were nothing more than a footnote in their perfect little story. I didn't sleep that night. Not a single minute. I just sat there and stared at my phone, at the messages I'd written but didn't send, at the list of emergency contacts I'd trusted, at the face of the people who were supposed to love us. And, slowly, something inside me started to burn. Not sadness. Not confusion. Rage. The kind of rage you feel when someone threatens the thing you love most in the world. The kind of rage that doesn't explode, you simmers. Builds, sharpens. Because I knew something now. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't bad judgment. This was deliberate. They chose Jessica's kids. They chose to forget mine. And I was about to find out just how deep that choice went. I used to think that being the forgotten one in a family was just a phase, like, maybe if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet long enough, and didn't cause too many waves, eventually they'd look up and remember I was standing there. That I was one of them too. That Harper deserved a seat at the table just as much as Jessica's boys. But that illusion started to rot the moment I saw my mom's text the next morning, short and clipped and completely devoid of guilt. Mom, we'll talk when we're back. Please don't overreact. It was just a misunderstanding. Just a misunderstanding. Like forgetting your grandchild existed was the same as forgetting to pick up milk at the store. I stared at those words for 10 full minutes, waiting for them to rearrange themselves into something more human, something resembling remorse, but they didn't. There was no apology. No. How is Harper? Is she okay? No. We made a mistake. Just a cold command to wait and to stop making a fuss. And that's when it hit me, really hit me. They didn't think they'd done anything wrong. I wanted to scream. To break something. To drive to the airport and wait with a sign that read, "Did you forget your granddaughter at baggage claim?" But I didn't. I couldn't. I had Harper. And I couldn't let her see me unravel. So I made her waffles and let her eat them with her hands. I braided her hair slowly, gently, as if my fingers could somehow undo the ache I knew was blooming quietly in her chest. And then I told her we were going to the park, just the two of us, because that's what we did. We made our own little world out of the pieces left behind. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop remembering the other times, the ones I had ignored. Like Harper's 5th birthday last year, when we invited the whole family and only Jessica showed up with her husband and a quick excuse about how Mom and Dad were exhausted and didn't want to risk getting sick. But 2 days later, there was a photo on Facebook of them at a crowded wine festival. Arms linked with strangers and smiling wide under string lights. Or Christmas the year before, when they forgot to buy Harper a present until the last minute and wrapped a candle with a tag that still said, "To Susan." Harper had smiled politely, like she didn't notice. But I did. I noticed everything. And I let it go. Every time. I let it go because I didn't want to be the angry one. I didn't want Harper to grow up in a family filled with tension. I wanted her to know her grandparents. I wanted her to feel loved by more than just me. But what do you do when you're the only one trying? What do you do when your love feels like begging? I called Jessica that afternoon, hoping somewhere deep down that maybe she would understand, that maybe she'd finally look beyond the perfect family photos and see the damage she was helping enable. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Rachel, not now. We're about to go ziplining with the kids." "You left Harper," I said quietly, too quietly. There was a pause. I didn't leave anyone. Mom and Dad were. They were responsible for her. I cut in, the heat rising in my throat. They left her with a neighbor. She ended up in state custody, Jess. She was scared. Alone. And no one even told me. Jessica sighed, like I was dragging her through something she didn't want to deal with. "Look, I get that you're upset, but can we not do this right now? We're on vacation. Mom said she'll talk to you when we get back." "Ma, you're on vacation because they took your kids," I snapped, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. You knew, you all knew. And no one even thought to check in on Harper. She's 6, Jessica. She's your niece. That's not fair, she said, voice icy now. You act like we're villains. Maybe if you weren't always so dramatic, people would want to include you more. And there it was, the truth, not even sugar-coated. You're not included because of who you are. I hung up without another word. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat there on the floor of the laundry room, the hum of the dryer masking the noise inside my head, and I thought, I don't belong here. Not in this family. Not in this idea I keep trying to save. It was the first time I'd ever said it out loud in my head. And it shattered something inside me. Because I realized I had spent years pretending this wasn't happening. I had convinced myself that if I just kept smiling, kept showing up, kept forgiving, the love would come back. That my parents would look at Harper and finally see her. That I wouldn't always be standing in Jessica's shadow, holding my child, and waiting for scraps of attention. But I wasn't invisible, I was deliberately unseen. And Harper? She was just collateral. That night, I wrote an email to my parents. I didn't yell, I didn't curse, I just wrote the truth. You left my daughter. You left your granddaughter. And you didn't even bother to tell me. You put her in danger and then acted like I was the problem for being upset. I don't know how we come back from this, but I need you to know I'm not going to pretend anymore. I'm not going to explain away your choices to make myself feel better. Harper deserves more. And from now on, she'll have it with or without you. I hit send. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt done. After I sent that email, I didn't hear from my parents or Jessica for 2 weeks, just a deafening silence that echoed louder than any apology ever could. In that silence, I watched them build a wall between us. They weren't even trying to hide, and with each brick, I felt a piece of our family shatter a little more. It began with the exclusion that came in subtle, surgical cuts. Social media posts celebrating family milestones where Harper's name and face were absent, even though she'd helped pick the cake at my nephew's birthday. Group texts planning grandparents' days out or holiday meals that didn't include us. And friendly reminders from Mom. Don't forget we're having a gathering next month, you know who it's for. And for who it wasn't for me or Harper. It was for Jessica's life. For golf outings, spa retreats, and school recitals that I wasn't invited to, didn't matter at. I realized I was living with one foot in the door and the other tripping over the welcome mat. Then came the larger injustices, the ones that touched more than just our feelings, they touched our rights. My mother, in one of her passive-aggressive text blasts, mentioned she was worried about the custody situation with Harper now that you're raising her solo. That worry, wrapped so plainly in holiday-themed emojis and thin concern, was really a threat. I knew exactly what she was planting in the air like seeds in a field. Doubt about my ability to care for my child, doubt about my stability, doubt even about my heart. And once doubt is sown on fertile ground, it grows fast. A few days later, I received paperwork in the mail, documents from a third party, my Aunt Linda's name stamped at the top as a concerned relative requesting a custody hearing. In that moment, the paper felt like a guillotine's edge placed at my throat. It was legal artillery, aimed at me under the name of family concern. I went into crisis mode immediately, printing every pay stub, doctor's note, co-worker's statement, daycare record, shining a light on my stable employment, my clean background, the love I poured into my daughter. I filed an answer, fought the petition with the kind of precision paperwork demands, and answered every accusation, real or implied, with evidence and composure. But while I showed the world who I was, what I felt burned inside because I realized I'd been betrayed not only emotionally but legally. I'd been forced to defend my child not just from strangers, but from the family I'd once trusted more than anyone. I'll never forget the day the hearing arrived. I sat in a courtroom that smelled like tension and cheap coffee at 8 in the morning, dressed in neutral tones, and clasped Harper's photo in my shirt pocket for courage. Across the room sat my parents, stiff as statues, eyes cold behind fake warmth. I could practically hear the click of their indifference. Aunt Linda's lawyer read from their petition. Doubts about my shift work, allegations of secondary stress in the home, gratuitous mentions of my divorcees, though being divorced made me less worthy. My heart pounded so violently against my ribcage I thought it would announce itself to everyone in the room. She's not good enough. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, and I did not tremble. I told the judge about how my daughter's laugh filled every room at home, about the open-door policy I had with her teachers and pediatrician, about how I sacrificed weekends and sleep so she could have the life I'd been denied when I was a kid. I placed her class art projects on the table, the awards for citizenship she won at school, her scrapbook full of pictures where she looked safe and loved, proof that what they were accusing me of was not only untrue but absurd. And at the end, I said, "Your Honor, I have been my daughter's mother since the day she was born. I don't just love her, I am her advocate, her protector, and her greatest champion." I might have even smiled when the judge thanked me and dismissed the petition. I thought maybe that moment would mend something in me, stitch together that ragged part of my heart, show me that blood doesn't always run red but sometimes runs straight into courage instead. But the damage didn't end, not even close. Because later that afternoon, they posted on Facebook a family update that read like a novel with the chapters about Smith and Macmillan's beach trip, bonding with the grandkids, looking forward to seeing everyone again soon, and yet there was still no mention of Harper or me, not a single line that said, "We love you too." And then the comments started pouring. "So lovely to see a united family. Looks like paradise. Can't wait for the next visit." Each one another brick of separation, another vote cast against our belonging. My daughter came home from school that day and gently asked, "Mommy, did Grandma and Grandpa forget about me?" She didn't ask why we weren't in those photos. She didn't ask why they never came. She just said the word forget in that small, fearful way that broke me into a million pieces. I told her no, sweetheart, they would never forget you, and we held each other a long time in the kitchen, pretending their love still existed. But I knew the truth. They had already forgotten us, or decided we weren't worth remembering. In that moment, I felt cut off at the root. I was fighting for more than inclusion. I was fighting for dignity, for justice, for the right to exist as part of this family without being forced into silence or submission. I realized that forgiveness without consequences doesn't heal, it permits, and I refused to permit more division, more disrespect, more lies. So I made a choice. I would stay in this fight not just for Harper's custody, but for our name and identity in this family. I would no longer let them decide which parts of us got to exist. I would no longer stand by and let them prioritize perfection over love. And, most importantly, I would no longer let us be erased just because someone somewhere decided we were the inconvenient ones. The war had begun not with screams or collisions, but with the silent steel of self-respect and resolve. And though I didn't know how the next chapter would play out, I knew that standing up, speaking out, even filing legal documents, was the only way to show my daughter that someone fights for her. That someone will always fight for her. The worst part about being quietly pushed out of your own family is that no one ever admits it's happening, not directly. They smile in photos that you're not in, send group messages that skip over your name, make plans for holidays that arrive without invitations, and call it just a mix-up or not a big deal when you ask why you weren't included. It's the kind of wound that never bleeds but keeps hurting, like a paper cut you can't stop touching. And the more I asked for clarity, the more they treated my pain like a problem. My mother's voice, once a source of warmth, had turned into a weapon of dismissal. "Rachel, you always take everything so personally." As if I was the one rewriting family history. As if I was the one leaving children behind. Jessica, who used to braid my hair when we were little, became a stranger who used phrases like, "You're overreacting," and "maybe they're just tired," to justify the growing list of ways my parents cut us out. She didn't see that tired was just an excuse. That what they were tired of truly was pretending to care about the parts of the family that weren't shiny or simple or perfectly posed. I wasn't the girl with the husband and a house in the suburbs. I was the single mom working swing shifts in the ER, too tired to bake cupcakes from scratch, too strapped to book family vacations, too bruised to smile in every picture. But I was still here. I was still trying. The final straw came the day I learned my parents had set up a college fund for Jessica's boys Jack and Caleb but hadn't done the same for Harper. I found out by accident, in a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear at a birthday dinner I wasn't even invited to. A coworker of Jessica's mentioned it to me at a school fundraiser. Oh, Susan's so sweet. She was telling me how they've already got a 529 plan for both the boys. Isn't it great how involved they are with the grandkids? I smiled politely, my stomach coiling tight like a spring, and somehow managed not to scream. I drove home that night with Harper asleep in the back seat, her cheeks rosy from running through sprinklers and her fingers sticky from birthday cake she barely got a slice of because someone accidentally forgot to put her name on the guest list. I watched her in the rearview mirror and thought, what am I going to tell her when she asks why no one ever comes to her school play? Why the birthday cards never come? Why the love feels so one-sided? The injustice wasn't in what they gave, Jessica's kidsit was in what they deliberately withheld from mine. Love shouldn't be a competition, but they'd made it one. And I'd been losing for years. I tried confronting them again this time, in a long, carefully written letter that I mailed, because I knew they couldn't interrupt a piece of paper. I wrote about everything. The missed birthdays, the social media erasures, the cold silences after the Hawaii trip, the legal ambush disguised as concern. I told them I still wanted a relationship, but not like this. Not one where I had to beg for a seat at the table, where my daughter had to earn what should have been given freely. I asked them to explain, to be honest, to just say the thing out loud I had been dreading my whole life, that they loved me less, that I didn't matter as much, that Harper was just tolerated. They didn't reply. No letter. No email. Just a voicemail from Dad, stiff and mechanical. Rachel, we got your letter. We're sorry you feel that way, but we think it's best if we all just take some space for now. As if space hadn't already grown like mold between us. As if their absence wasn't already the loudest part of our lives. So that's when I stopped waiting. I stopped expecting birthday wishes or thoughtful gifts. I stopped checking the mailbox in late May, hoping someone remembered Harper's recital. I stopped scanning Facebook for signs that maybe, just maybe, we were still part of the story. Because we weren't. We were ghosts. And I was tired of haunting a home that no longer existed. Instead, I started writing our own story. I found a therapist for both of us, someone who helped me understand that generational patterns don't define legacy. I started setting boundaries like armor plates, no more last-minute babysitting, no more guilt-tripped visits, no more pretending I was okay when I wasn't. I gave Harper the truth, gently and slowly, wrapped in honesty and love. Sometimes people don't know how to love the right way, but that doesn't mean we're not lovable. And slowly, painfully, we began to heal, not because the people who hurt us came back, but because we stopped waiting for them to. That healing didn't come without grief. Grief for what could have been. For the relationship I always imagined between my daughter and her grandparents. For the feeling of family I watched Jessica take for granted. But inside that grief, something else was born, something harder, stronger, a sense of self-worth I'd never truly held before. I looked at Harper one morning, peanut butter smeared across her cheek, humming softly as she lined up her toys for a tea party, and I realized something I hadn't admitted before. They didn't deserve her. Not because she wasn't lovable, but because she was, and they didn't see it. They didn't see the miracle of her. The kindness she carried. The way she said thank you without prompting. The way she instinctively hugged her teacher when she sensed someone was having a bad day. They didn't see the light in her. And if they couldn't see that, they didn't deserve to be near it. So I let go. Not all at once. Not without pain. But I loosened my grip on the idea that they would ever become the people we needed them to be. And in doing so, I finally made space for something better. I made space for peace. It's a strange thing, that hunger for recognition, not praise, not applause, just acknowledgement, just a moment where someone looks at you and says, I see how hard you're trying, and it matters. I didn't want my family to worship me. I didn't even need them to agree with every decision I'd made. I just wanted them to stop pretending like I was some sort of permanent disappointment, like I'd failed a test I didn't even know I was taking, and worse, like Harper was collateral damage from my supposedly imperfect life. After the silence settled and the dust of their rejection had begun to form a pattern, I did something I wasn't sure I had the strength for. I tried again. Not because I was weak, but because I was still holding on to the tiniest thread of hope, a sliver of belief that people can change if given the opportunity, if shown the right mirror. So I reached out not for forgiveness, but for clarity. I asked my mother, in a text I rewrote 10 times before sending, if she'd like to come to Harper's art show at school. I said she didn't have to stay the whole time, didn't need to make a grand gesture. Just show up for 15 minutes and smile at the little girl who still kept a crayon drawing of Grandma and Grandpa taped to her bedroom wall. Her response came 6 hours later. Mom, we'll be in Nashville that weekend for Jack's baseball tournament. Maybe next time. Hope Harper has fun. That, maybe next time, was the soft blade of a dull knife, the kind that doesn't slice clean but bruises as it cuts. A phrase she'd used so many times it felt automated, a door swinging shut in slow motion. But I didn't delete the text. I stared at it, memorized it, and let it remind me of the truth I kept trying to rewrite, that I was no longer the daughter they chose to show up for, and Harper was not the grandchild they prioritized. Still, I kept trying, not because I thought they deserved it, but because Harper did. She deserved a mother who didn't give up, who modeled persistence in the face of rejection, who turned pain into motivation instead of resignation. I started going to every school event dressed like it was a business meeting, hair brushed, shoes polished, eyes dry. I clapped the loudest, brought the cupcakes with sprinkles, made signs with glitter. I took photos, not to show the world but to show her. Later, when she might wonder if I ever regretted that it was always just the two of us. I wanted her to see that 2 was enough when love did the work of 10. At night, after she fell asleep, I worked on rebuilding what I'd lost. I restructured my schedule, asked for a more stable shift at the hospital, joined a local single-parent support group even though walking through the door the first time felt like admitting defeat. It wasn't defeat, it was reinvention. I met other moms like me, exhausted, tender, full of rage and hope and everything in between. We shared stories about courts and co-parents and families who smiled at one child while forgetting the other. I felt less alone in those meetings than I had in my own parents' house in years. One evening, at a community center potluck, I found myself sitting across from a woman named Claire who had a voice like chamomile tea and eyes that had clearly seen too much. She listened as I told my story, nodding softly, and then said something I'll never forget. "You're not broken, Rachel. You're just not bendable anymore, and that's what they hate. They liked you better when you bent to fit their world." That sentence wrapped itself around my spine and straightened something inside me. So I stopped bending. I started telling the truth even when it made people uncomfortable. I called out the favoritism when Jessica posted a photo captioned 3 generations, with only her, the boys, and our parents. I commented, "Missing Harper in this Oni, did she take the picture?" It wasn't petty. It was a boundary. It was a flare fired into the dark to say, "We're still here, we see what you're doing." Jessica blocked me the next day. So I stopped watching. I stopped checking for updates, stopped hoping they'd change, stopped waiting for an apology they clearly believed I didn't deserve. But I didn't stop building. I reached out to Harper's teacher and asked if there were volunteer roles I could take. I became the mystery reader on Fridays, brought in books with characters who looked like us, sounded like us, felt like us. I helped organize the spring fair, even though I had to switch shifts and sleep 4 hours on folding chairs to make it work. And the more I gave to the community we were building, the less I needed from the one that had shut us out. Still, every now and then, the hurt would come back like a shadow at dusk, soft but consuming. I'd see a family walking together at the park, grandparents holding both children's hands, and I'd ache for Harper, not for me. I didn't need my mother's approval anymore. I needed my daughter to feel whole, to know she was loved without question, without condition, without competition. So I created that world. Bit by bit, piece by piece, I filled the gaps they left behind with people who saw her, her dance teacher who knelt to tie her shoes even after class ended. My neighbor Julie who dropped off cupcakes on Harper's birthday just because she remembered. The principal who pulled me aside one day and said, "Your daughter is one of the kindest kids I've ever met. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." And when Harper looked at me one night, her hands wrapped around a mug of warm milk, and said, "Mommy, I like our little family," I knew I had done something right. I knew recognition didn't always come from where we expect, but that didn't mean it didn't come at all. Sometimes, the most powerful validation comes not from our parents, but from the lives we raise and the strength we grow when they stop cheering. And I wasn't done growing yet. It was supposed to be a neutral setting, a family dinner arranged at Jessica's house under the fragile guise of peace, an invitation sent to clear the air, as if years of favoritism, abandonment, and passive cruelty could be swept clean in the span of an evening and a few glasses of wine. I hadn't intended to go at first. My stomach turned at the thought of sitting across from people who couldn't even admit they'd done something wrong, people who had weaponized silence and smiles in equal measure. People who had treated my daughter like an optional accessory to a family photo, but Harper, ever the hopeful soul, had overheard the phone call and asked with innocent excitement, "We're going to Aunt Jessica's? Will Grandma be there?" And in that moment, I said yes. Because sometimes, when your child's heart still believes, you let it believe just a little longer. The house looked just like I remembered, immaculate, curated, every room a Pinterest board brought to life, and as I stepped inside with Harper's hand in mine, the air was so heavily perfumed with cinnamon and control that I felt the invisible pressure on my chest before anyone had even spoken a word. Jessica greeted us with a tight smile, her eyes scanning Harper's shoes like she was checking for mud, and my mother appeared behind her moments later, wearing the kind of expression you reserve for guests you didn't invite but can't afford to offend. Dinner was already served: grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, everything portioned and plated like a magazine spread. We sat around the table with Harper nestled between me and Jessica's oldest, Jack, who offered her a polite smile before returning to his iPad. There was a hollow stiffness in the air, the kind that made your skin itch, and I tried to breathe through it, to focus on Harper's chatter as she told her grandmother about her art project. About how she'd drawn a picture of a castle with Grandma, Susan, and Grandpa Mark inside. My mother nodded, barely. "That's nice, sweetie." No follow-up. No warmth. Just a sip of wine and a glance down the table like she was counting the minutes. I tried. I really did. I brought up Harper's reading scores, how she'd improved 2 grade levels since last fall, how her teacher said she was one of the kindest kids in class. I watched their faces closely, looking for something that resembled pride, but there was nothing. Just silence, polite nods, and a quick turn of conversation to Jack's upcoming baseball tournament and Caleb's science project that might win regionals. I felt the old sting again, the one that started in the back of my throat and tightened behind my eyes, but I swallowed it, forced a smile, and kept chewing. Until my father spoke. "You know, Rachel," he said, setting his fork down with the heavy finality of a man about to declare something that would not be debated. "Maybe if you weren't always so defensive, we could have a real relationship again. This tension, it doesn't help Harper." And just like that, the air snapped. I looked at him, stunned, my fingers curling slightly around my napkin. "Defensive? You left my daughter in the care of a neighbor and got on a plane, and you didn't even call me. I found out from Child Protective Services. That's not defensiveness, Dad. That's being a mother." He shook his head, slow and deliberate. "It wasn't intentional. We thought she'd be fine for a few hours. It wasn't like we abandoned her." "You did," I said, my voice low, trembling with restraint. "You did abandon her. You didn't even leave a note. You didn't call me, didn't check if I was okay, if she was okay." Jessica interjected, her voice sharp and tired. "This again. Can we not turn every family event into a therapy session, Rachel? Honestly, it's exhausting. And there it was. The real reason they'd invited me. Not to reconcile, not to apologize, but to box me in, to corner me under the warm lights and matching dinnerware, to convince me I was the problem, the disruption, the storm. You know what's exhausting? I said, now trembling, not with fear, but with fury too long buried. Watching my daughter grow up without the love she deserves because the people who are supposed to love her treat her like she's invisible. That's what's exhausting. And watching you all pretend like nothing's happened, that's infuriating. My mother finally put her glass down, eyes narrowing. We have done our best. We didn't raise you to be so angry. No, I said quietly, rising from the table with Harper's hand already seeking mine. You raised me to be silent. Ah, and that silence had turned into shame, into a life of second-guessing, into years of shrinking to fit into their expectations, but I wasn't doing that anymore. Not for them. Not in front of my daughter. I won't let her grow up thinking she's second best, I added, gathering our things, my back straight even as my heart pounded like thunder in my ears. I won't let her believe love is something you have to earn by being convenient or quiet. Jessica scoffed. You're unbelievable. No, I said, meeting her gaze for the first time that night. I'm just finally done being what you want. Harper looked up at me then, eyes wide, not afraid but steady, and I could see the moment something clicked in her little heart that her mother had chosen her. That in this house full of love rationed and resentment disguised as tradition, someone had finally stood up and said, no more. We left that house in silence, the door closing behind us like the final chapter of a book I no longer needed to read. And as we walked down the steps to the car, I felt it not grief, not guilt, not even anger anymore. Just relief. Because I wasn't alone in this war anymore. Harper saw the truth now. And there would be no going back. There's a certain silence that follows the breaking point, not the kind that brings peace but the kind that echoes louder than any scream, the kind that clings to your skin like humidity and presses into your chest until you're not sure if it's your lungs struggling to expand or your heart just giving up trying to beat against a world that keeps pushing you away. The night after that dinner, after the confrontation that had stripped me down to my rawest nerve, I tucked Harper into bed with the gentlest hands I could manage, kissed her forehead like I always did, and whispered, "You're my whole world, baby," before turning out the light. But when the door clicked behind me and I sat on the edge of the couch in the living room, the weight of everything I'd been holding back collapsed on top of me. Slow at first, like the soft settling of snow, and then all at once like an avalanche. I didn't cry the way people cry in movies gracefully, with delicate sniffles and a single tear trailing down the cheek. I broke down. Ugly, gasping sobs that came from somewhere below my ribs, from that part of me that had been screaming silently for years. A grief that wasn't just about my parents or Jessica or even the cruelty they'd shown. It was the grief of having believed, for so long, that love was something I could earn if I just worked hard enough to be worthy of it. I curled into myself, arms wrapped tight around my knees, rocking slightly like a child, and for the first time since becoming a mother, I whispered words I never thought I'd say out loud. I don't think I can do this anymore. Not because I didn't love Harper. God, I loved her more than breath itself. But because the world felt so heavy, and I was so tired, and it seemed like no matter how hard I tried, no matter how loud I spoke or how honest I became, I kept getting pushed to the edge of the frame, like a smudge on the perfect picture they were trying to paint without me. There's something cruel about being erased from your own bloodline, especially when you still carry the names, the habits, the memories. It wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. It was waking up every day knowing that people who were supposed to love you the longest had decided your existence was inconvenient, that your child's laughter didn't matter as much as someone else's trophies or Instagrammable smiles. I stopped answering texts. Not that there were many. I skipped church. I skipped the neighborhood block party. I even skipped my volunteer day at Harper's school and lied to the teacher, saying I had a shift at work. I didn't. I just couldn't bring myself to smile at other parents who still had grandmas bringing cupcakes or grandpas taking pictures with proud eyes. I couldn't stomach being in spaces where other people's normal was my constant ache. I didn't tell Harper I was hurting. I kept brushing her hair, packing her lunches, drawing hearts in the corner of her napkins, and putting on the show of a woman in control. But even she began to notice the distance in my eyes. The way my smiles didn't quite reach my face anymore, the way I stared at the window for too long like I was waiting for someone to walk through it. "Mommy?" she asked one evening as I folded laundry, her voice soft and careful in that way kids use when they know something's wrong, but don't have the words to name it. Did I do something bad? And that question shattered me. Because despite everything, despite all my efforts to shield her, the truth had still seeped through the cracks. "No, baby," I said, kneeling down and cupping her tiny face in my hands. "You're the best thing in my whole life. Don't you ever think this is about you." "But Grandma doesn't like me," she whispered, eyes watering. "She never comes to my stuff." I wanted to lie. I wanted to find a sentence that would protect her from the truth, something that wouldn't stain her spirit or leave her wondering what she'd done to be so unseen. But all I could say was, some people don't know how to show love the right way. Alma. And then I held her for a long time, longer than usual, long enough for her breathing to slow and her limbs to go slack in that way only children do when they finally feel safe. But I didn't feel safe. I felt hollow. Because I wasn't just battling family anymore. I was battling exhaustion, emotional depletion, the gnawing voice in my head that kept asking what if they were right, what if I was too much? Too dramatic? Too broken? I sat on the porch that night, wrapped in a blanket, the cold air biting my skin as punishment or comforty couldn't tell which, and looked up at the stars. Wondering how many other mothers were sitting alone at that exact moment, wondering how many of us were clinging to our children like lifeboats in seas we were never taught to swim. I thought about my own mother and how different things had been when I was Harper's age, how she used to braid my hair and leave notes in my lunchbox, how we used to dance in the living room with the record player spinning, and I couldn't understand how that woman had become this stranger who looked at my daughter and saw nothing. What had changed? Was it me? Or was it her? Was I the one who'd failed, or had she simply given up on the version of me that didn't fit the mold she'd imagined? I didn't have the answer. All I had was the ache. And the loneliness that follows when the people who are supposed to hold you up become the ones you have to heal from. I thought the lowest point had already passed, thought the silence from my parents and the growing emptiness at family functions was the end of the story, that I'd already unraveled every thread, found every ugly truth, faced every rejection. But it wasn't the end, it was just the surface, and the real betrayal hadn't even shown its face yet. It started on a rainy Thursday, the kind of day where everything feels dim and heavy, like the sky itself is grieving. I was cleaning out my inbox, deleting old emails, searching for a daycare registration form, when I saw a message from Jessica, unread, buried in the mess of work notices and utility bills, dated from nearly 3 months ago. I must have missed it during a long shift, or maybe I'd seen her name and avoided opening it altogether. But this time, something pulled me to click. The subject line was vague. "Just wanted to let you know," and inside was one short sentence, barely more than a whisper. "Mom and Dad met with a lawyer to draft a new will. They're leaving everything to me." That was it. No greeting, no explanation, no emotion. Just a casual death sentence dropped in digital ink, like she was confirming dinner reservations, like she didn't even realize what that one line meant to someone who had spent her entire life trying to prove she belonged in a family that never really let her in. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the words, blinking hard, reading them over and over, like I was trying to decode something written in a language I wasn't meant to understand. Not because I wanted the money god, it wasn't about the money, but because it proved what I'd always feared deep down, the thing I'd tried to silence and excuse and forgive 1,000 times. They had already written me out. Long before the dinner confrontation. Long before the missed birthdays and the forgotten recitals. My parents had already made their decision. They weren't just playing favorites. They were erasing me. I felt like I was looking into a mirror that had been cracked for years, only now the pieces had finally fallen away to reveal the whole, ugly truth underneath. And worse? Jessica knew. She'd known for months. She didn't warn me, didn't speak up, didn't question, it just accepted her place on the throne of a kingdom. I was banished from the moment I stopped being useful. I felt rage ignite in a way I never had before, not the sharp, uncontrollable kind, but the quiet, steady kind that turns into action. The kind that makes you stop crying and start planning. That night, after Harper went to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine, pulled out my laptop, and opened a blank document titled, "What Really Happened." And for the first time, I wrote everything down, not for them, not to beg or justify, but for myself. I wrote about the way they made Harper feel invisible. About the night she asked if she'd done something wrong. About the voicemail from CPS, the silence that followed, the cold dinner table, the bruising emails. I wrote it all. And the more I wrote, the clearer things became. They had never intended to include me. Their love had always been conditional, a performance I was expected to perfect. And when I failed to follow the script, when I divorced, when I struggled, when I spoke up, they cast me out like a defective product. But Harper? She hadn't failed anything. She was pure and bright and full of potential, and she didn't deserve to grow up believing that love came with requirements. So I called my lawyer. Not out of revenge. Out of protection. I asked what my rights were, what Harper's rights were, and I told him everything. The abandonment, the attempted custody maneuver, the exclusion from the will, the emotional damage already inflicted. He listened, silent and patient, and then he said, "You're not wrong to fight back, and you're not overreacting. This is real. And if you want to take legal steps to protect your daughter from future manipulation, I'll help you." That validation, real, professional, unemotional, was the first thing in months that didn't feel like a hallucination. We began the process of drafting a protective legal boundary, terms of supervised visitation, a cease in any further custody discussions, formal documentation of the abandonment incident in Hawaii. It wasn't about punishing my parents. It was about making sure they never had the chance to hurt Harper again in the name of family. I wanted everything documented, airtight. I didn't care how it looked. I cared how it protected. And then, something unexpected happened. Claire, the friend I'd met at the single parents group, who'd once told me I was no longer bendable, that same Claire texted me and said, "There's a lawyer friend of mine who specializes in estate and family disputes. You might want to talk to her. Sometimes what looks like rejection is actually a legal exclusion." I made the call. And what I learned made my hands go cold. Because in my parents' new will, the one Jessica had hinted at, there wasn't just exclusion. There were lies. In the financial disclosures submitted for their trust documents, Harper wasn't even listed as a grandchild. My name appeared once, as estranged daughter, no contact. No contact. The woman who'd brought them soup after Dad's knee surgery. Who called every birthday for the first 27 years of her life. Who begged them to be part of Harper's birth, and then cried alone in a hospital bed when they never showed up. No contact. That lie told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't just moved on. They'd rewritten history. And this time, I wasn't going to let them do it quietly. I hadn't planned to confront them like that, not in public, not without warning, but sometimes the truth doesn't wait for invitations, and justice doesn't wear its best clothes when it decides to knock on the door you've spent years keeping closed. It was the first Sunday of June, the day of my niece Caleb's graduation party, which of course had grown into a full-blown family event with catered food, hired photographers, a balloon arch tall enough to see from the road, and every extended relative from 3 states away packed into Jessica's pristine backyard like actors on a stage, clapping and smiling for a play I hadn't been invited to again. Except this time, I went. Not for the party, not for the cake or the shallow pleasantries, but for the confrontation I had spent weeks preparing for. The confrontation that would pull every ugly truth into the light where it could no longer hide beneath the glossy veneer of, "We meant well," or "You misunderstood," or "Let's not do this here." I showed up with Harper, who held my hand tighter than usual, sensing that today was not just another awkward family gathering, and I walked through the side gate with a calm I had manufactured through sleepless nights and legal consultations, wearing a dress that made me feel unshakable and a purpose that could not be softened by fake smiles or cold glances. Jessica spotted me first, her smile freezing mid-sentence as if someone had hit pause on her carefully curated expression. Mom turned a second later, and the color drained from her face with the speed of someone watching their secret walk through the door. Dad looked like he might actually drop his drink. "Rachel?" Mom said, voice laced with surprise and an undercurrent of dread. "We weren't expecting you." "No," I said, steady, measured, not loud but loud enough. "You weren't, but I was expecting you." She blinked. What are you talking about?" I didn't respond to her yet. I turned to the crowd, the cousins, the aunts, the distant relatives who only knew bits and pieces of the story, fed to them by the same people who had cut us out and painted themselves as victims. I didn't care how it looked. I only cared that it was heard. "I'm only going to say this once," I said, my voice clear, unwavering despite the tremble in my chest. "And I'm saying it now, because I'm done letting silence cover what's been done." "Arlie." Jessica moved toward me, hand outstretched like she could somehow contain this moment, control it. "Rachel, don't do this here. Not today." But I kept going. "You left my daughter in the care of a stranger and boarded a flight to Hawaii with no warning, no emergency contact, no permission. She ended up in state custody, crying for me because none of you thought she mattered enough to call. And when I confronted you, when I begged for some acknowledgement, some accountability, you told me I was overreacting." Whispers spread like wildfire through the guests. I stayed quiet for too long. I let it eat me alive. "But I won't let you erase us anymore. I know about the will, I know about the documents. I know you've officially removed me from every part of this family's legacy and labeled me as no contact to protect your narrative." "Okay." Dad stepped forward now, jaw clenched, trying to salvage control. "Rachel, this is not the place." "This is exactly the place," I interrupted, voice rising now, not in anger but in power. "Because you made it the place when you pretended in front of all these people that you still had a daughter, that your family was whole, that Harper didn't exist. You made it the place when you posted pictures of every child but mine, when you told lawyers I was estranged while I was still calling you on birthdays, still showing up at your door hoping you'd notice she was growing, thriving, needing you." Mom's lips parted, eyes glistening now, but I didn't give her room to interrupt. "I'm not here for your guilt. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to tell the truth because Harper deserves to know she had someone who stood up for her, who refused to let her be the secret shame of a family obsessed with image." Silence followed, thick, charged, suffocating. Then Jessica, arms crossed, said, "You're blowing everything out of proportion. You never did things the right way, Rachel. You always needed more, wanted more. That's why none of us could keep up with you." I turned to her slowly. "What I wanted," I said, "was to be treated like I belonged. What I needed was to know that my daughter wouldn't grow up wondering why the people who were supposed to love her couldn't even remember her name. And if that was too much, then that says more about you than it ever did about me." Then I handed Mom the envelope. Inside were copies of the legal motions I had filed, restrictions on visitation, protections for Harper, statements from counselors, evidence of emotional harm. Not out of vengeance, but because boundaries without action are just wishes. "I'm done protecting your comfort at the expense of our dignity," I said, softer now, but every word still a stone dropped into water, causing ripples that would last far beyond that afternoon. "From now on, everything is documented. Everything is enforced. You don't get to hurt us quietly anymore." I took Harper's hand, turned, and walked away before anyone could stop me, before the tears I had buried beneath months of composure could rise, before the guilt I had learned not to feel could creep back in. Because I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a mother. And mothers fight. It didn't happen overnight, the shift in power, the slow, steady reclaiming of my voice, but once it began, it moved like a tide turning at last in my favor. Quiet but certain, undeniable in its strength, and for the first time in years, I could feel the difference in how people looked at Mena with pity, not with confusion, but with a dawning respect that only comes after someone has watched you walk through fire and refuse to burn. The confrontation at the party didn't make them apologize. Not right away. My parents didn't call, didn't email, didn't reach out with trembling hands begging for forgiveness. And I hadn't expected them to, because people like that rarely crumble, they calcify. They dig deeper into their story, because to admit fault would unravel the life they'd constructed so carefully around their own comfort. But what it did do was expose them, force them out of the shadows where their version of the truth had lived unchallenged for years, and that mattered more than anything they could have said. Word spread quickly through the family, not just about what had been done to me, but how I'd stood my ground, how I'd laid out the facts without screaming, how I'd carried myself with a kind of grace that couldn't be faked. In slowly, people who had once looked away began reaching out. Cousins who hadn't called in years sent messages that said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." A distant aunt forwarded me an email chain Jessica had tried to bury, one that showed just how long they'd been planning to cut me out, how they had talked about me like I was the problem while quietly redrafting their legacy around my absence. That email became evidence. My lawyer filed a formal request for an estate review, citing ethical concerns and misinformation in their previous filings. The law couldn't force them to love us, but it could demand transparency, and in the weeks that followed, I watched as the documents came under scrutiny, as the version of events they'd sold so cleanly began to fall apart under the weight of actual proof. And then, one Friday morning, I received a letter in the mail, simple, unadorned, but shaking in my hands like a holy thing. It was from the law office handling the estate. Due to newly submitted evidence, the clients have chosen to amend their documents. All children and grandchildren will now be included equally. Please confirm updated contact information. No apology, just correction. But that was enough. Because it wasn't about the inheritance, really it was about the acknowledgement, the reversal of a judgment they had tried to stamp as permanent, and knowing that my name, my daughter's name, had been written back into the record, had been put in ink instead of erased in pencil. That was the victory I'd been chasing all along. Not revenge, not retribution, but recognition. I stood in the middle of the kitchen that day, letter in one hand, Harper's artwork drying on the table beside me, and I smiled, not because they had changed, but because I had. Because I had stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing myself, choosing Harper, choosing the kind of love that does not need to be earned. And that, finally, felt like justice. Peace doesn't arrive all at once. Like some grand epiphany, it settles in slowly, gently, the way a breeze creeps into a room that's been closed off too long, and when it comes, it doesn't announce itself with trumpets or applause. It just sits beside you quietly, letting you know you've made it to the other side of something that tried very hard to break you. That summer was the first time in years I felt the world loosen its grip around my chest. I found myself waking up without dread, without rehearsing potential conversations in my head before they even happened, without the heavy cloak of shame that used to drape itself over my shoulders every time I saw photos of the family I wasn't invited to be part of. Instead, I spent my mornings braiding Harper's hair and packing picnic lunches, not because I had to escape reality, but because I was finally living inside of one that felt kind. We built a rhythm together, Harper and I, a new kind of family soundtrack composed of bedtime giggles, early morning pancakes, Saturday library visits, and long, winding talks about what love really means. And she started asking less about grandma and grandpa, stopped scanning crowds for familiar faces that never arrived, stopped drawing pictures of houses with missing windows, and started filling them with sun and stars and two smiling stick figures labeled Mommy and Me. And that's when I knew healing was happening, not just in me, but in her too. I found my strength in the ordinary, planting flowers in the backyard with Harper on Sunday afternoons, laughing until our cheeks ached as we danced barefoot in the kitchen, catching fireflies in mason jars and letting them go again just to watch them flicker through the twilight, and those small moments became my anchor, my reward, my proof that even when everything else falls away, love that's real is always enough to rebuild a home. People sometimes ask me if I regret cutting ties, if I ever wished I'd stayed quiet, just kept the peace to keep the illusion alive, but what I tell them is this. Silence would have cost my daughter her confidence, would have taught her that being loved means being quiet when you're hurt, that family gets to hurt you as long as they share your name, and I wasn't willing to let that be her inheritance. Not when I could give her something better: truth, courage, self-respect, and a mother who would go to war for her even if it meant walking away from everything she used to call home. And in the quiet that followed the chaos, I found unexpected light new friendships formed in support group circles and coffee shop corners, invitations from Harper's teachers to join parent councils, holiday meals shared with neighbors who didn't share my blood but shared their hearts, and slowly, the gaps left behind by those who left became filled with something softer, truer, more lasting than obligation ever could be. There are still moments, brief ones, where the past knocks gently on my mind, where I hear an old song or see a photo from years ago and wonder what could have been, but the ache is softer now, no longer sharp or all-consuming, and it fades quickly, replaced by the sound of Harper's laughter echoing through our tiny home, and I know deep in my bones that we are exactly where we're supposed to be. If you had asked me a year ago what it meant to be strong, I might have told you it was holding everything together without letting anyone see you cry, showing up no matter how much you were hurting, pretending to be okay so that the people around you didn't feel uncomfortable. But I know now that real strength is something much quieter, something much braver, something that doesn't always look like resilience on the outside but feels like choosing yourself over and over again, even when everyone else has chosen to walk away. I look back now not with bitterness, but with a kind of reverent sorrow, like walking through the ruins of a house you once called home, realizing it had been falling apart long before you noticed the cracks in the foundation, long before the ceiling caved in, and knowing with absolute clarity that while you mourn what could have been, you no longer wish to live there. Because I did love them, parents. My sister, I loved them in the way that children are wired to love, unconditionally, without question, with hope that often outweighs reality, and even now, I think a small part of me always will, but that love no longer comes at the cost of my own worth, and that's the difference between forgiveness and forgetting. Forgiveness is when you release the weight, but forgetting is when you pretend it didn't happen. And I will never again pretend that what they did didn't leave a mark. I carry that mark with me, but it no longer bleeds. It no longer defines me. What defines me now is what I built in the aftermath, the way I kept showing up for my daughter when it felt like no one showed up for me, the way I stood in courtrooms and kitchens and school auditoriums and said, "You matter," over and over until it took root in her heart, the way I learned to be the kind of parent I never had, not by being perfect but by being present, honest, open, and unapologetically protective. There's a quiet kind of freedom in accepting the truth that some people will never be who you needed them to be, and that their inability to love you the way you deserved isn't your fault, not now. Not ever, and from that truth grows something even stronger: self-trust. I trust myself now. I trust my instincts, my voice, my decisions. I trust that I did the right thing by walking away. And I trust that, in doing so, I gave Harper a future untethered to shame. If you're reading this, if you've ever felt like the forgotten one, like the shadow in someone else's spotlight, like love was conditional and belonging was earned by being quieter, nicer, less, you are not alone, and you are not unlovable. You are just brave enough to see the truth. And brave enough to build something better. That is your legacy. That is your power. And no one, not family, not blood, not history, can ever take that from you.